After purchasing a Synology NAS, there are two main questions people immediately want answered. The first is, what are all these applications in the package center? And the second is, which are best? Unfortunately, it's not always a simple answer because things change. In Synology DSM-6, the best photo management applications were Synology Moments and Synology Photo Station, but those are gone now, and you're left with Synology Photos in DSM-7. There are applications that haven't been updated in what feels like forever, with one of the most notable that I've used being Synology Audio Station, a pretty great application that actually works well with a mobile application that looks like it was made 15 years ago. So in this video, I'm going to rank Synology's applications for home users. Now, we're not going to go through all the applications because context matters, and most home users won't be using Active Backup for Microsoft 365, but they might be using Active Backup for business. So again, home user context, ranking most but not all of Synology's first-party applications. But this is the most important part. This is a ranking versus other Synology applications and a select set of direct competitor third-party applications. If you bring in the entire world of third-party applications, there's just too much to take into consideration. So we're focusing on Synology applications versus one another and where you should spend your time implementing them. Finally, links to a bunch of tutorials for these applications will be listed in the description if you're interested, as well as a link to hire me. All right, so we're going to take this one by one, and if you've never seen anything like this before, the best applications will be at the top, and then when there are better options available, it'll be at the bottom here. We're going to go one by one, and like I said, not all the applications Synology has, but most of their first-party applications that I think home users will use. So the first we're going to take a look at is Audio Station. And I'm going to put it in the decent category. You should definitely check it out if you've never used it and you have an audio library. The problem with it is that the mobile application is old. It just is. It looks old. It functions old. It works. That's not to say, all that is not to say it doesn't work, because it does. It's just to say that if you compare it to options like Plex Amp, it's not going to function the same way. But actually, in a web browser, Audio Station actually works, and it works pretty well. So I'd say if you haven't ever used it and you do have a big audio collection, not the worst option. Web Station, right off the bat, better options available. You can host a website on a Synology NAS. You can host a WordPress website on a Synology NAS. There's even a third-party tool for it. There are better places to run it. With the prices of mini PCs, you're better off offloading that specific service to another device if you can. Again, not to say that it's not going to work, because it will, but with websites and exposing it externally, while you can do it on a Synology NAS, you're better off running it somewhere else. Synology Photos, I'm going to put it in the good category, mainly because there's not a ton of other options. There is a tool called Image that I've been paying pretty close attention to. It's a self-hosted alternative to kind of photo management. And I think at some point that could potentially replace Synology Photos for a lot of Synology users. But the thing with Synology Photos is that it replaced Synology Moments and Synology Photo Station. And I'd say it's a replacement for Synology Moments, but it's not necessarily a replacement for Synology Photo Station. And that's what a lot of photographers liked in DSM-6. However, for regular home users that just want to back up their photos from their mobile application to their NAS with complete privacy, Synology Photos is a pretty great option. It does have albums and facial recognition, though it's not that great. It does have subject recognition. So it does have a lot of the features and functionality that Google and Apple provide in a self-hosted / private way, but it will not function as well from a searching and potentially even mobile application perspective. VPN. So this is going to be a mix between decent and better options available, but I'm going to leave it in the better options available. If this is your only option, you can host a VPN server on your Synology NAS. I would recommend probably using OpenVPN. I have a tutorial that I'll link in the description. And it works, and it works well. And I know a lot of people that run a VPN server on their NAS and have had no problems with it. Where I'll say that better options are available is if you have a router, for example, that can run an open VPN server or a WireGuard server, or you have a separate device, a hypervisor, somewhere else that you can run either OpenVPN or WireGuard, it's probably better to offload it to that specific device. It's not to say it's bad. It's not bad. It works. But it is to say that you're probably better off offloading it somewhere else if you can. Active Insight, there's no better option available, quite frankly, at least none that I know of. I'll put it in the decent category. I thought about leaving this out because for home users, you're probably not going to use this. If you have a bunch of different Synology devices and you wanted to monitor them all, Active Insight would, start to go into a higher category at that point. But for home users with one NAS, there's really not that much that you'd be monitoring. So what I'd recommend, rather than that, set up notifications on the NAS so that you're aware if anything actually happens. And at that point, Active Insight, while it still might provide some basic information for you, it's not really going to be something that you actually need. So Virtual Machine Manager is going to go into the decent category. And I'm going to put it into the decent category because it really depends what you want to run. So due to the nature of Synology devices and how they're not actually that powerful in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to be a pure hypervisor that you're most likely used to if you've ever used Proxmox or ESXi or XCP-ng. There's a lot of different hypervisors. This is not going to be able to compete with them, but it's not going to be able to compete with them mainly from the angle of actual performance on the Synology device. Now, you can run a Synology DSM instance inside of Virtual Machine Manager. That's a great option. I have a tutorial on how you can run Home Assistant on a Synology NAS. That's a great option, mainly because the resource requirements for those are really not that significant. However, if you wanted to run something like a Windows 11 virtual machine, probably not the best place to run it. You're going to probably run into performance issues. So it's in the decent category, with the asterisk that it really depends on the operating system that you want to run. All right, Snapshot Replication, straight up. It's in the best category. First, there's not an alternative. If you want to use snapshots, you have to be using the BTRFS file system, which most people at this point are. What you're doing is you're basically freezing your files at a point in time. So what it allows you to do is go through and take a snapshot to freeze your files at a point in time. So you go through today, accidentally delete a file, you can go back to that snapshot from yesterday and actually restore from it. That's a great option. Newer versions of Synology devices plus DSM-7, you can use something called immutable snapshots, which means that you basically cannot delete those snapshots, meaning that nobody, including administrators, can actually delete that snapshot. So it's a great form of protection against things like ransomware. Snapshots to me are a first line of defense. So if you delete a file, you delete a folder, God forbid you get hit with a ransomware attack, your first line of defense is going back to that snapshot replication tool and actually restoring your files from there. So it's in the best category. Every single user that is running a Synology NAS with BTRFS should most likely have scheduled snapshots configured on almost every folder. There are a few exceptions, but almost every single folder should have them configured and run on a set schedule with a set retention policy. So Synology Drive, I'm going to put that in the best category as well. Synology Drive is, like I've said many times, my favorite Synology application. It allows you to sync files back and forth from a device to your Synology NAS. It allows you to access those files from a web browser. It allows you to access them from a mobile phone. If you start to use Synology Drive, you will see that your workflow can basically be built around it. And I've created videos on the actual workflow that I use, and the core of it is Synology Drive. But basically, it allows you to ensure that no matter what device you're actually on, all of your files will always be there. With Windows and Mac OS, you can actually use something called on-demand sync as well. So let's say you wanted to have access to all your files, but you only wanted to download them and utilize storage space on your physical device when you're actively working on them. With Synology Drive, you can. It works a little different on Mac OS than it does on Windows, but what it allows you to do is basically double-click the file, and in the background, it's going to go through and download that file, and unbeknownst to you, it's basically going to function as if the file already existed on your device, Granted, for larger files, you're going to have to wait for it to download, but in terms of pure functionality, you're not signing into anything, you're not copying anything, you're not accessing any SMB shares, you're simply double-clicking that file. It's using the Synology Drive client to actually download that file from the NAS, and then when you edit it and you save, it will automatically upload that file to your NAS. So at that point, your NAS is the core of your actual data, which it should be, and you're using either the Synology Drive client, the mobile application, or a web browser to actually access that file. So again, my favorite application on Synology NAS devices. Next is Container Manager, and this is going to be somewhere between good and best. I'll put it in the best category because this is Docker. It's going to allow you to install Docker containers on your Synology NAS. And newer versions of Container Manager allow you to utilize Docker Compose, which, if you've never used it, is an extremely easy way to manage and configure Docker containers on any Docker host. But this is something that wasn't available in older versions of Docker on Synology NAS devices. So in terms of what you can install, for the most part, the sky's the limit. There's a bunch of different Docker images out there. You can host various different applications. I put out a video last week on an application called Homar, which is basically a dashboard application. You can run that. I've put out videos on Nginx Proxy Manager, Pi-hole, etc. You can run all of that inside of Docker. So Container Manager is going to be your friend, especially if you want to stay away from first-party Synology applications, because Container Manager allows you to actually utilize other Docker containers that could replace a lot of these applications here. So it's in the best tier for that reason. CloudSync, I will put CloudSync in the good tier. CloudSync allows you to sync files back and forth from your Synology NAS to a cloud location. So if you're using Google Drive or Dropbox, etc., you can sync files either from or to cloud server locations. So what I mean by that is you could set up a bidirectional sync, which would say that a folder on your Synology NAS will stay in sync with a cloud servers folder, or you can download the changes only, so you modify them on the cloud location and your Synology NAS will actually download all those changes, or vice versa. Just keep in mind, this is not a backup, it's a sync. So if you accidentally delete a file on your Synology NAS, it will delete it on that cloud server as well. So this is not a backup tool, it is a sync tool. It's very good in that context. I have clients I've worked with in the past that use it to sync their data to Dropbox, which is where they prefer to edit out of. And then they're basically ensuring that those changes that they make are automatically synced to the NAS, which then will have snapshots performed on them, which will then be backed up as well using Hyper Backup, which we'll get to in a little bit. But that one application kind of allows them to complete that entire workflow just with that one application. So it's in the good category with the understanding that for everybody, it's probably not going to make sense. So Synology's DNS Server, I'll put it in the decent category. It's actually a very powerful DNS server. There's a lot that you can do with it. The reason I'm going to put it in the decent category is because for most home users, I feel like it's overkill. If you want to configure a DNS server, you're probably going to have extremely basic DNS records that you want to configure, and it's going to take you a little while to understand how this works. If you want to configure a DNS server, you could look at Pi-hole. Pi-hole is a great option for home users because it allows you to block ads, but also create local DNS records. That is probably going to be a little easier to understand. It's going to be harder to implement, potentially, but it's going to be easier to understand how it works and probably easier to manage. So it's a good option, but for the context of home users, it's really a decent option, and you should probably look to other options first. Though if you fall back to this, it is a pretty good option. Video Station. Video Station will be in the decent category as well. Video Station, the reason it's in the decent category is because almost everybody will fall into the bucket of Plex, Jellyfin, or Emby. Almost all of you. If you start looking at configuring a media server on a Synology NAS, the first three actual tools you're going to be brought to are those, and it will not be this. With that said, I have worked with clients that use it, and it actually was an eye-opening experience because I never considered this as an option. However, in the context of how they were using it, it actually did make a lot of sense. With that said, if you have movies and TV shows and potentially music, etc., that you want to sync, the first option most people are going to go to is Plex. From there, you're going to hit either Jellyfin or MB. I'd probably evaluate those first. But if you purely just want a basic video player, which is what I think the context of those users, what they were using it for, Video Station is a good option, so you could check it out. Hyper Backup. Hyper Backup is a best tier. This is the best way that you can back up a Synology NAS. And quite honestly, you should probably have multiple backup tasks. So one locally, one offsite, etc. Your backups for your data, RAID is not a backup. So I have a lot of clients that ask why they need to set up a backup, and it's because RAID is not a backup. Yes, you do have some redundancy with RAID, but it's not an actual backup for your data. So you're not going to actually be able to recover any of your data if multiple hard drives fail at the same time. You're also not going to be able to recover any of that data if you're hit with a ransomware attack. So for that reason, backups are paramount and you must configure them. The best backup tool on a Synology NAS is Hyper Backup. So the only thing I'll mention in terms of Hyper Backup is there's a lot of different destinations that you can use Hyper Backup on. It could be Synology C2, it could be Backblaze, it could be a local external hard drive, it could be a local Synology NAS, it could be a remote Synology NAS. There's a lot of options. But what you have to do is ensure that your data is getting backed up somewhere. And you're going to do it using Hyper Backup. And final note is you can enable client-side encryption if you're worried about backing it up to the cloud, which you can actually do for Cloud Sync as well. But it allows you to back up using client-side encryption. So if you have a fear of backing up your data to a cloud server, enable client-side encryption, and that will take care of that. So Synology Surveillance Station. This is going to be a tough one, because I'm going to put it in the decent category. And I'm going to put it in the decent category for one very specific reason. It's the licenses. So in order to use Synology Surveillance Station, you have to buy license packs. With newer versions of Synology cameras, the camera itself comes with a license. So if you want to use Synology Surveillance Station, if you've determine that this is the right option for you and you don't own any cameras, look at Synology cameras because you're going to save yourself all of the license fees. If you have a camera set up currently and you have a bunch of cameras and you decide that you want to start using Synology Surveillance Station, you're probably going to have to buy camera licenses. You get 2 for free by default. Anything more than that, you have to pay. So where this ends up losing out is really on that side. The functionality of the application is good, I'd say. In terms of functionality, it's in the good category. But in terms of an overall setup, it starts to suffer. To give you some context, I use Blue Iris. I have, I think, like 14 cameras at this point. I paid, I think, $60 for the application total when I first bought it, and that's it. So 14 cameras, I paid $60. Granted, I do have that running on a different device, and it has to run using Windows, which I don't love, but it works. It works well. If you put that in the context of Synology Surveillance Station, I would have had 2 licenses for free, and I would have had to buy 12 licenses. So understand what you're getting yourself into if you decide to use this. It's a good option, but it's not necessarily the best option. And there might even be better options available depending on exactly what you're looking for. So Active Backup for Business, I'm going to put in the good category. It's actually a very good backup tool. And I know a lot of people that are using it. I use it as well to back up all of my devices. And what it allows you to do is back up all your devices to one central server. So think of all of your devices in terms of backups. So you can set up individual backups on every single one of them and then point them to the destination of your Synology NAS. And you could use a tool like Veeam, for example, which is a great backup tool. The downside is that you're individually managing all those devices. What Active Backup for Business allows you to do is actually back up all of those devices, but manage them in one central location. And then all you're doing is installing an agent on all of them, and then you're actually managing them through the Synology NAS. So Active Backup for Business is awesome. I really, really like it. The reason why it's in the good category as opposed to the best, and I will mention that for Synology devices, if you're purely talking that you want to back up your devices using a Synology NAS, it might be in the best category. But evaluating it against other options, it's in the good category because I've had issues with Mac OS backups. I've had issues with Linux backups. The Linux kernel requirements could be better. So it works extremely well with Windows devices. I'd say it works good with Mac OS. It works decent with Linux. So keep that in mind. Storage analyzer, I mean, I'll put it in the best category because it's really the only way to evaluate all of your data that's running on your Synology NAS and see exactly what is taking up space where. It is a good tool, very good. It's minimal. It allows you to run it on a schedule. It's a tool that I think everybody should have set up, and I think they should have it set up to run on a schedule just so that if you're in a pinch and you have to know where, you have your data in case you have to delete anything, this is the first place to look. So NoteStation. I'll be the first to admit that I don't really take notes, but I'll put it in the good category. And I'm going to put it in the good category in terms of privacy. So a lot of people don't want to use cloud services for their notes. So from that perspective, it is a good overall application. Where you start to run into issues is that if you start to compare it to some of the other options out there, other third-party tools, if privacy is not a concern, it starts to suffer in comparison to them. They're going to function better. But for a pure just note-taking tool with privacy at the forefront where you are managing the entire process, NoteStation is a great option. Finally, is running a mail server on a Synology NAS. Do not do it. Okay? Don't do it. Run it somewhere else. You do not want to run your own email server. There are plenty of videos out there on why. I would suggest you find a different alternative. Yes, a lot of them will cost you money, but no, you're not going to run into a lot of the problems that you would run into by hosting it yourself. So my suggestion is find a different place to do it. Now, I want to hear where you disagree because I know you probably do. After consulting part-time for over a year now, I've seen a lot of different scenarios and applications that I'd never think to use. So let me know what you think in the comments. Other than that, hope this video helped out in some way. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.